Good morning and thank you for joining us for our webinar Wednesday session for April 2019. Today's session we're going to be looking at security in the built environment, a better approach. My name's Katie, I look after IT and all the digital side of things here at CABE, and I'll be acting as the moderator for this morning's session. We like to keep our webinars nice and interactive. So for those of you who've joined us before, you're probably more familiar with the procedure, but for anybody who's new, there is the option to send us questions. You can type those into us on the right-hand side of your screen, or perhaps at the top, depending on the device that you're using to view us. There's a little question box, and you can just type your questions into there. They will then pop up on our screen, and once the presentation comes to a close, we'll then move into a Q&A session and we'll ask any questions. If we get a huge volume of questions and we kind of get towards the 9 o'clock mark, we will close the session, but we will pass any questions on to the presenter and you can catch up sort of separately after the event. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, you can still get in touch with any questions. Just pop your questions over to us via email at info@cbuild.com, and again, we will get back to you. If you're on Twitter, hashtag CABECPD. So this morning, your presenter is Stuart Williams. He is Head of Security Consulting at BB7. Stuart is a Chartered Security Professional and holds a Masters in Security Management from Loughborough University and is a Fellow of the Security Institute. He's also a member of the Built Environment Security Specialist Interest Group, established in partnership between the Security Institute and BRE to develop security best practice and to support the development community. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to hand over to Stuart. So if you just give us a couple of seconds while we just click a few buttons at our end, and then Stuart will take you through this morning's presentation.
Okay, good morning. I'm Stuart Williams. I'm the Head of Security for BB7, and the title of our webinar session today is Security in the Built Environment, a Better Approach. Now, you may be wondering why we're talking about security, but the premise is that CABE was founded to promote and advance the knowledge of all disciplines concerned with the built environment, to develop high standards of professionalism, and to encourage cooperation between all those disciplines involved. So today I'm delighted to be invited to help you all better understand how my discipline of security fits into the built environment. Now, recent research conducted by Professor David McElhatton of Coventry University highlighted several key concerns about security in the built environment. He found that developers invariably believe that security ruins the aesthetics of a project, it delays a project, it normally blows the budget, and it can stigmatize a site. So a supporting objective of my session today is to demonstrate to you that developers, even those with a high security requirement, can be delivered on time, within budget, in beautiful, unobtrusive ways that do not destroy a client vision, if skilled professionals are used from the outset and throughout the design program. Now, what do people think when you say that you do security? When I met an architect last year, I was told that security types are all ex-military, they have tattoos, a bald head and no neck. And I suppose I partially fit the bill. I am ex-military. You'll see from my photo that I am bald, but I do have a neck and I don't have any tattoos. So I would hope I'm viewed differently. But if anyone asks and you say that you do security, you do get this quizzical look. You can see them thinking, you know, are you a bouncer? Are you a wheel clamper? And when people talk about security engineering or security in the built environment, this is probably what they think of: security equipment. You know, the same architect also said to me that he was disappointed that security consultants, even from respectable engineering companies, tend to focus on fences, gates, CCTV, access control. And I too feel this frustration. I can recall my early times when I was at Bureau Happold in my first commercial role, when I was told that my job was to just specify BS standard security equipment, as that is what engineers do. It's down to standards and specifications. And if you attend any security exhibition or conference, you will see endless rows of security products: a camera that can see further, a system that can detect earlier, a bollard that can stop a faster vehicle. None really offering any more security assurance, just doing what they already do, but a bit better, but not necessarily more secure. And while all of those are of value at some point in a project life cycle, they are seen by many as the start point for design rather than the end point. They're all about selling a product, because that's what they are, they manufacture, rather than being concerned about making developments more secure. And as a security professional, I feel disappointed at the lack of innovation, intellectual application of security. Society in general, and the development industry in particular, does not really know what we do. So hopefully today I'll bring clarity to what some see as a black art, and I hope to demonstrate why security is needed, how we at BB7 are very different to the mainstream, and what we believe security should do as a design discipline. And I'll provide you with some planning and design case studies to help illustrate what can be achieved through successful collaboration. Now, I suppose the start point is, why do we need security? Now, this is a quote from Professor Martin Gill, one of the world's leading criminologists, about what offenders say to him about security. There is always security there. Security is no big deal. It's expected, but most of the time it's not very good. Most of the time there are gaps, and we exploit those gaps. And this is the key point of today. It's not just about having security, because anyone can do that. In fact, everyone does do that. But it's about developing security that works, that's effective, that's appropriate to the project context, proportionate to the level of risk. And my experience suggests this is very rarely the case. Security is normally considered in terms of what you've procured rather than in terms of how it performs. Security should be about creating an environment where the criminal or terrorist is not free to act or is not comfortable to move through. It's about making sure we send a message to criminals that this development is not an easy or a soft target, so please look elsewhere. And in a subtle way that the normal visitor and user wouldn't even recognize or appreciate. Now, the need to be secure is one of our primary needs in life. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, security is second only after shelter and the basics of food and water. And that primal need to be secure remains with us today. Last year, BRE conducted a survey of security as a baseline for the development of the new CABE scheme, which is the global standard for security risk management in the built environment. I draw your attention to the fact that 65% of respondents considered security a factor when deciding which hotel to stay in. And at the bottom, you will see 73% of respondents said that they would refer to security ratings for hotels if they had them, and 55% for shopping centres. This demonstrates how important security is to users of the built environment, and why in this current climate, and I would suggest always, that safety and security should be a key design influence on any major development project. Now, as built environment specialists, we have a big role to play in providing this safe environment. This is what some people call the crime triangle, which depicts that for a crime or a terrorist event to happen, you must have an offender, a victim, and the location for the crime to be committed. Now, it's the built environment that brings together the victim and the location. We create these spaces. We develop the circulation routes and permeability. And if we want them to be secure, we need to shape them to create environments that are not conducive to crime and terrorism. And how well do we do this? Well, I would be bold enough to suggest that we don't do it particularly well. As highlighted by Professor McElhatton in his research, often the advice is oversimplistic, excessive, or inappropriate due to the people and the agencies involved in that process. Here on the left is an image of Westminster Bridge and the temporary security measures introduced following the attacks in London last year. On the right is an image of Westminster Abbey and the Houses of Parliament. Both were immediate reactive solutions to a changing threat, but they're still in place. And in the case of Westminster, over a decade later, certainly reactive, we can all agree that they're far from aesthetically pleasing. They might be effective, but certainly they're destroying our public realm and sites of national importance rather than contributing to their success. Even for a retrospective solution, is this really the best we can do? According to Transport for London, the risk of a vehicle attack on a road was not even on their risk register, despite similar attacks all over Europe throughout 2017 and 2018. And here is another example of a reactive retrofit solution. This is the posh hotel complex on Yas Island, home to the Yas Marina Formula One circuit and the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Now, last year, following the vehicle attacks on Berlin, Munich and Nice, the Abu Dhabi government decided that the threat level warranted intervention to protect these crowded places during the race weekend. And because none of the hotel chains had designed the buildings to be secure from the outset, these temporary retrofit measures were placed in front of every hotel and the pedestrian circulation route from the Formula One circuit to the post-race concert venue. They're ugly, they're not that effective, they impede public safety, and they certainly destroy the guest arrival experience. They probably also heighten the fear of crime and terrorism rather than alleviating it. But equally, if the hotels had been designed with security in mind, then perhaps this wouldn't have been necessary. That future-proofing is something worth considering for projects from the outset. Its ability to adapt to changes in threat or regulation at a later date without resorting to outcomes like this one shown. Now, we don't always get it wrong. For example, this is the Emirates Stadium, the home to the new Arsenal Football Club. Due to the prevailing threat from terrorism at the time, especially with regard to crowded places in London, the Emirates Stadium was designed with security in mind from the outset. The hostile vehicle mitigation line was innovatively designed using public art, and it's now often quoted in security publications as a best practice example of what can be achieved. It's discreet, the number of obvious bollards have been minimised, visitors are drawn to the sign and the cannon as an arrival experience, and it's probably the selfie or photo opportunity around the site. Most visitors don't even understand the security value of what they're walking past. Security is embedded into the design of the building and the solutions are discreet. And this is how it should be done. And perhaps another excellent example is the new US Embassy in Nine Elms in London. It was moved from its previous location in Grosvenor Square, primarily due to heightened security concerns and the challenges with achieving adequate security in an inappropriate location. This time it was located on a site specifically selected for the security requirement, and obviously security was considered from the outset. And again, I would suggest they've got it very right, with excellent use of landscaping, changes in elevation, water features, long approaches, natural channeling, all contributing to a reduction in vulnerability and providing a solid foundation for what will be their very stringent security operations, far better than whatever could be achieved at Grosvenor Square. So what is the solution? How do we ensure that security is better embedded into our built environment? Well, the first move is for designers and security professionals to think differently and better understand the nature of the problem, to think as strategists rather than just as engineers. Einstein is often quoted as having said that if he had 1 hour to save the world, he would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. For example, with the threat of vehicle used as a weapon on the bridges of London, it's perceived to be a security risk that demands a security solution. Actually, it may be better considered as a citywide movement framework problem that requires much wider consultation and consideration, especially in the long term. Then there is often a knee-jerk reaction to find an immediate solution. Government or corporations must be seen to be doing something, and there is growing pressure for it to be addressed quickly, which may not always be the most effective cost-effective functional solution. But as captured here by Robert Greene, rarely do these solutions involve creativity and innovation that could create a fantastic solution for our urban environment and could do far more to reduce the burden on our state security managers and our emergency responders. This requires security as a planning and design discipline to have increased influence on the built environment decisions, for security to have an equal voice at the design table rather than being viewed as a minor specialisation. We need to be involved earlier in the design program when there are fewer constraints to solutions. And we need to use people with creativity, innovation and flair rather than consultants who are perhaps too quick to jump to a security product catalogue. As examples, let's just look at these 4 locations. We've got the British Museum, Wembley, the hotel in Abu Dhabi and Notting Hill. Each of these is a crowded place, but each presents a very different security problem and therefore demands a different solution. And here I'm not talking about a different physical or technical solution, but conceptually for us to think differently. For the museum, visitors are more likely to be free-flowing. They'll arrive consistently throughout the operating hours of the museum with peak flows in between. They also have a very specific crime aspect to consider, as well as the crowded places requirement against terrorism. Now, the stadium is only really an issue when an event is on, when arrival times are known in advance. They normally have a clearly defined boundary and often visitors must possess a ticket to pay to gain entry. Therefore, validation is easier and access can be more tightly controlled for safety as much as security, presenting opportunities for such screening and searching externally. Now, for a hotel, again, visitors are normally completely free-flowing. And while the sleeping areas may be private, in the other public areas, visitors are positively encouraged to enter to maximise the footfall in the public amenities such as restaurants and spas. Operations are 24/7. Hotels need fee-paying customers to move freely to financially survive. And then for public event spaces such as Notting Hill, the boundaries are less well defined, probably operating 24/7, visitors in huge numbers, free-flowing, and with no boundaries and minimal or no methods of access control. Each presents a unique security challenge, and conceptually, each should be considered differently, with a different planning solution long before deciding which physical and technical measures to design. And yet this stage is often missed, as engineers often jump to the technical design at REBA stage 3 or 4. So as part of formulating a security strategy, it's worth pointing out people often focus on the wrong foundation. Security tends to focus on operations and maintenance as part of a facilities management operation, and if required, calling for the police to respond when it goes wrong. There is often a lack of a specific security role in planning and design, or at best a minor role. And we would suggest that this is really where security should sit if it's to be done properly and effectively. Much of security can be delivered more appropriately and cost effectively in planning and design. This often provides a sound foundation for future security operations. Finally, if all that fails, then law enforcement and the criminal justice system can be the final component. But this should be the end point, not the start point for security. And this is even more relevant given the constraints on most law enforcement agencies with ever decreasing budgets and resources. And although an unpalatable reality, security professionals and governments accept that the risk of terrorism cannot be removed, it can only be reduced and managed. So success in planning and design can greatly influence where an incident can occur, which in turn can enable more targeted security operations. And the next big element to consider is for security to be balanced and strategic. Often there is an over-reliance on security technology in operations. Technology is sexy, it's exciting, it's something tangible, but it's also very expensive, very quickly out of date, and it cannot solve all of your security problems, despite what product manufacturers will tell you. Equally, in many countries, operations are cheap, manpower is plentiful, but people are subject to human frailties and complacency. Nearly every place robbed or attacked has CCTV and security guards present, proving that they're not effective on their own. I would suggest that it's better to provide a solid foundation of physical security, achieved through careful planning and design, with high levels of inherent security, on which you can then build your technology and security operations as support tools. And as well as being involved early and having influence, it's important for continuity of security advice to be maintained, especially on a project with high security requirements and a prolonged design and construction process, where design team members change, client reps may change, government regulations and regulators may change, and continuity of security design can be easily lost. For example, I developed the security and counter-terrorism strategy for the new Louvre Abu Dhabi Museum, which commenced design in 2007 when I worked with Bureau Happold, but was not completed and open to the public until late 2017, over 10 years later. And during construction, the contractor raised many queries about elements of the security design, which few people could answer. And we're not alone in this requirement for continuity. There has been much talk recently about the Dame Judith Hackett report on the state of fire risk management. And one of her key recommendations is the maintenance of this golden thread and a comprehensive audit trail of decision making to ensure greater levels of fire and life safety in buildings. And this applies equally to security as a discipline. And pursuing the strap line for the CABE conference earlier this year, perhaps our security designs should be based on more than just compliance, but a pathway to excellence. We should aspire to make excellent, safe and secure buildings, irrespective of the regulations placed upon us, which in the case for security is minimal. So as well as security professionals, we also see ourselves as something else, where designers, influencers, collaborators perhaps. These are far more encompassing than the term security engineer. It's about knowing what to do, what you do, knowing how you go about your job, and collaborating with developers and other disciplines to find solutions that solve our security objectives. Now, to enable us to undertake this early work, we need to think differently. We need to be not just security professionals, but built environment specialists. We need to understand how architects and planners think and be able to speak their language. You know, they will never become security specialists, but we can become better at built environment. I worked for over 5 years as a security advisor to the Abu Dhabi Urban Planning Council. Now, UPC was the first regulator in the world to embed security specialists within its planning framework. Everyone I worked with was a planner, an urban designer, or an architect. I had to learn what made them tick, how they worked with collaborative workshops, and above all else, had to really understand the built environment, from planning laws, plot allocations, master planning through to development control regulations and individual plot designs. Our team delivered the innovative and award-winning Safety and Security Planning Manual, which took the best advice around the world for preventing crime and terrorism, brought them together for the first time, which is innovative because they quite often are contradictory, and made it appropriate to the local context in the Middle East, which would provide advice to developers, planners and designers on security. Now, the manual is very different in what it looks like, what it says and how it says it. Particularly key messages are portrayed in a colourful graphic format, easy to use planning and design toolkits. Planners and architects draw and see things graphically, they don't read text. It was written by planners and designers, for planners and designers, and as well as being targeted at security professionals so they can better understand what an architect or a planner needs. And it's this combination of being embedded at the UPC and the formulation of the SSPN which has provided our team with a passion and deep understanding of the built environment, the planning and design process, and how people like you within the industry work and behave. And I would suggest that other consultancies need to follow suit, perhaps through CPD and engagement with professionals, so that rather than just providing projects with a specialist security input, we can sit among you as an equal part of a design team and not feel out of place, and for our work and deliverables to suit their requirement rather than ours. I've talked about early engagement in planning and design and influencing spatial layouts, but what do I mean by that? Well, this starts by asking new types of questions from the outset while plans and designs are still malleable. Is this the right site for the development of this risk? Does it introduce new risks to the existing landowners? If not, like the US Embassy, should I build it somewhere else more appropriate? Even talking with architects about, is the building the right size and shape for the size of plot? Can we achieve standoff distance? Does the building shape exacerbate blast effects? Can we design out the problem rather than engineering out the problem later on? Where are people going to park? Is space for parking constrained? Will it introduce more risk to the project, particularly when terrorism is concerned? And addressing these issues at an early stage, we can save a fortune in cost and effort in the later stages when layouts and building designs become more fixed and are quite often at that stage impossible to address fully. We should also look for more innovative planning solutions to provide higher levels of security for our developments. One option is to consider a collective solution where similar assets are grouped together and protected to a higher level. The image on the left is of Canary Wharf in the UK, protected by a district level security solution with shared security operations and a shared security culture. And that was created as a result of continued targeting by the IRA during the 80s and 90s and its economic importance to the UK. The image on the right is a collective solution for mixed-use development in Abu Dhabi containing 3 identified crowded places. And here the vehicle checkpoint is shared by those 3 assets, one of which is a new national football stadium, a hotel and a food and beverage outlet. This collective solution provides high levels of security to all 3 venues with a shared operation, even though each plot is separately owned and operated. And as well as being more effective and secure, it also greatly saves on space and costs compared to 3 individual solutions. As the threat has evolved in recent years, our national security agencies accept that private business and development must do more to look after itself and work in partnership with neighbouring businesses and with the public sector to better achieve a secure environment. And as well as thinking collectively, we need to look for wider, more creative solutions. This is the plan for a hostile vehicle mitigation line surrounding the new Hazard bin Zayed football stadium in Abu Dhabi. But the primary focus was to provide protection to the stadium, which you can see in the middle, and that was achieved through embedding security into the wider master plan. The security umbrella was pushed further out, in places achieving over 150 to 200 metres of standoff distance to the main stadium. But not only that, it also protected the hotel, some of the food and beverage outlets around the stadium, all of the main approach routes and the places of assembly. Now, some of the HVM line was created by other building facades, some through landscaping, which greatly reduced the requirement for expensive and obtrusive HVM measures. And this is the architectural rendering of part of the food and beverage outlet, which was part of that site-wide HVM line. Here you can see the significant levels of standoff distances achieved, mainly through a landscaping berm with just a small number of active bollards to allow for mandatory emergency vehicle access. Note the lack of obvious security equipment, note the aesthetics, note the preservation of the project vision, highly secure, but largely achieved without deploying certified security products. Now, and at a building level, we also need to look for innovation and creativity. And perhaps we can achieve this by looking back in history when cities and buildings were designed to provide security. This is the old city of Briançon, high in the French Alps, built by a military engineer Vauban to King Louis XIV, and now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now, we can no longer build our cities or our individual buildings, for that matter, in this fortified way. Our world is far more connected, and global cities, by their very nature, are permeable to all. So, however, we can achieve protection in other ways using some of the same historic principles in our modern buildings. Note the minimal entrances with drawbridges, which can be closed when under attack. These channel people to approach along known routes, which are always under supervision. There is distance in the form of a moat or a large ditch to keep would-be attackers away from the walls. And again, these are overwatched. Now, if we jump forward to the modern day, here is the design for the new Zayed National Museum in Abu Dhabi. The main museum is hidden under the mound, and the wings sit atop this landscaped area. Three sides of the site are surrounded by a water feature, effectively a moat, and access for pedestrians is across 2 footbridges. You can see from the cross-section that this route is impervious to vehicles and also a challenge to anyone on foot. Key threats are mitigated, and anyone approaching on foot must follow a defined path which will be under surveillance. Now, this wasn't part of the design. This was part of the design anyway. I cannot take credit for Lord Foster's spectacular design. But as security professionals, we help to subtly influence the design to achieve our security objectives. And while it looks nothing like a fortress of old, it achieves the same natural challenging, and it greatly reduces the vulnerability to key threats, and it provides a sound base for other physical, technical, and operational security solutions. And similarly, this is the design for a luxury hotel in Abu Dhabi. The original water feature, which was much smaller, was extended to the front of the hotel, and a wooden bridge design was created for access into the hotel lobby, all aligned with the architectural vision for the hotel, which is located on the coast. The bollards were spaced further apart than the standard 1200 millimeters, based on the amended road layout and a vehicle dynamic assessment, which precluded a direct approach. VIP spaces immediately outside the lobby were moved slightly further away, which enabled standoff distances to be increased. And part of the entrance was structurally enhanced to ensure protection against a defined blast scenario. But this was limited to changing a single column due to the success in plan. Now, no guest approaching this luxury hotel will notice or understand the inherent levels of protection and the deterrence value as security is unobtrusive. Note the absence of obvious security equipment. Again, the project vision is preserved and the site is not stigmatized in any way. This is the early concept drawings for the strategic approach to security for the new Louvre Abu Dhabi Museum. Note the distance of the vehicle access control points away from the museum buildings, located as close as possible to the plot boundary, which provides over 100 meters of standoff distance, with an inner line of hostile vehicle mitigation still providing a minimum of 30 meters, providing adaptability and a range of options for the future operator. Note that the roads approaches are offset. There is no direct vehicle approach route into the heart of the museum, reducing its vulnerability to a direct vehicle attack. Service vehicles approach from elsewhere and below grade. Private vehicles are parked some distance away, and close access is only allowed for VVIPs, emergency vehicles, and outsized delivery of artwork. And again, it's not always possible in certain environments, but possible in some. As security professionals and developers, we need to be more aspirational to push the boundaries, and my experience in the last 10 years has highlighted that far more is possible when you ask. And it's more often that security consultants don't ask. They jump to the more simple, straightforward solutions, perhaps in the commercial desire for efficiency rather than creativity. And this image shows the Northern Bridge access to the Louvre Museum. Note the natural challenging of pedestrians monitored by technical surveillance systems. Note the extended distance and time for detection and security decision making. And most importantly, note the lack of impact on aesthetics and visitor experience. Very secure, but very discreet. Ultimately, when we decide to include hostile vehicle mitigation measures into a project, standoff distance is the key. Put simply, every meter matters. This is due to simple mathematics and physics, with the damage caused reducing exponentially for every small increase in distance. Now, you may often hear the desire to achieve 25 to 30 meters, which should provide a reasonable level of protection to the building. However, you can still protect a building with far less standoff, as is often the case in cities where land and space is a premium. However, in Abu Dhabi, where space was more readily available and the cities are all new and still developing, much greater distances could be achieved. And as we previously saw at the Louvre Abu Dhabi, the outer HVM line achieved over 100 metres and the inner line still 30 metres. This greatly reduces the impact of a detonation on the building structure and facade, and also it significantly increases the level of deterrence to any would-be criminal or terrorist. Now, incorporating HVM into a design is always a challenge for security professionals. And again, I would suggest there is a need for innovation and creativity rather than immediately seeking an obvious certified counter-terrorism product, such as a bollard, a roadblocker, or a robust gate. As a case study, this is the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, a valuable asset as it looks after the Emirates Sovereign Wealth Fund, estimated to be about $875 billion, second only to that of Norway. So strategically important and deserving of protection. Now here you can see a significant degree of standoff distance has been achieved completely through landscaping. The terrace landscaping stone upstand achieved vehicle denial without any security products. This is a purpose-designed HVM, but to the average person, this just looks like nice landscaping, which was the business image they wanted to portray. Similarly, this is a cross-section image from a planning application for a mixed-use development in Abu Dhabi that incorporated a luxury hotel. Here they have cleverly incorporated several planning requirements within the public realm design. The need for walkability around the site, the need for shading for the route using canopied trees, and the requirement to provide standoff distance and HVM. And obviously this is a landscaping solution to a security problem, fully integrated with the pedestrian circulation and aesthetically pleasing. And again, note the complete absence of security products. Security is effective, proportionate, appropriate to the project context. And security did not cause any delay, it didn't blow the project budget or stigmatise the site. And this is of a case of the Founders Memorial in Abu Dhabi, or the Constellation Memorial, national monument and a crowded place. It's a major event space throughout the year, and the government demanded high levels of protection. And you can see here the wall at the front and the bollards. Now, I thought they achieved this very well. In many ways, you can criticise the design, saying it looks like it has a perimeter wall, but I think it works because of the design quality, and the height of the wall also serves as a seating platform. It uses very high quality of material. The wall is covered in the same marble as the rest of the design, and it's a continuation of the material used for the actual memorial in the background, the visitor centre, the circulation routes around the memorial, and the main gathering area in the front of the visitor centre. So the HVM wall looks as if it's always been part of the design, therefore it blends in. And they've also used that wall for other functions, such as the signage, as you can see there for the Founders Memorial. So the memorial is beautiful. Security has been embedded into the design discreetly. And apart from these few bollards included for permeability, I don't believe the architectural intent has been compromised in any way. Now, as with hostile vehicle mitigation, vehicle access control points are pretty often necessary in most secure environments, but they're often ugly, simplistic security elements, and this requires innovation and creativity to better integrate them into a project's design. And as an example of what can be achieved, this is the vehicle access control point for the Armani Hotel at the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Now, while the hotel entrance is protected also by an inner line, this is the outer layer. And in the foreground, you may be able to see the line of bollards and the road blockers, but they've been designed to be almost invisible as part of the landscaping. And in the background, that strange shaped building with the wooden facade is the actual access control point. Unlike any I've seen before, architecturally designed to be different. Doesn't even look like a checkpoint. And in fact, I missed it completely when I first visited the site. On most days, visitors are able to drive straight past and up to the front of the hotel. But for higher profile events, or if the threat level is raised, then the site is able to offer higher levels of protection. Well designed, thought through from the start, high levels of inherent security, adaptable, and seamlessly incorporated into the architecture, landscape, and road layouts. Irrespective of the threat level, this site will never need to deploy ugly retrofit solutions, as adaptability has been incorporated from the outset. Perhaps one of our biggest challenges with hotels, museums, and other publicly accessible private spaces is the searching of pedestrians on entry and the protection of main entrances. Do we screen or not? If so, how? Clients will often say that they don't want airport-style searching regimes, but equally, they don't want attacks to happen. So it's for security designers to clarify this requirement and then ensure there's sufficient space and infrastructure to enable equipment and searching procedures to be conducted, as well as perhaps the incorporation of delay measures. Now, these images are taken from early design deliverables for the Louvre Abu Dhabi, demonstrating the significant coordination and 3D modelling that was taking place to ensure sufficient space and infrastructure was provided. Bolt-on later on just don't work. It's difficult to prevent circumvention, and the equipment doesn't fit in the space, and it creates a very poor visitor experience. This can be seen at the British Museum now, where check-in did not previously take place, but now it does. And they've had to create a specific app which informs visitors of queuing times in an attempt to offset the negative responses on social media. Now, this is the realization of that early concept work. The architect has embedded the scanners in the lobby design, covered them in black onyx to cover the walk-through metal detectors, and white marble to encase the bag scanners. Now, maybe not an ideal entrance procedure, but definitely better looking than the standard airport design. And at the time, we did look at emerging technology, including smart lobbies, but it was not sufficiently mature to include within the design. However, that has moved on, and I recently visited the trials of a range of scanning systems specifically designed for high throughput, with the aim of detecting the largest threats of firearms and explosives. This is a system on trial at Gatwick Airport with capacity to scan several thousand people per hour, moving through at a standard walk-in space with hand luggage, which is a significant step forward. And the beauty is that this is the same system carefully integrated into the design of 2 new hotels. Not always in use, but possible to channel visitors through the portals without any obvious overt security in place. No compromise of the client vision, no scaring of visitors, no stigmatization of the site. Security is effective and discreet and aesthetic, and actually not as expensive as the client initially imagines. Now, sometimes it's not always possible to achieve the standoff distance, and it becomes necessary to enhance the structure of the building to provide sufficient protection against blast effects. The image here is an architectural rendering of the new Al Maria Central Mall in Abu Dhabi. It was necessary to have several levels of basement parking across the entire building footprint, and in the centre, this design included a 4-storey atrium. The cantilever design was particularly vulnerable to any additional loading with blast, and as a result, enhancement was required. And this was the answer to harden the structure to prevent progressive collapse. The solution was for most of the columns to be increased in size, and some, due to the atrium design, required additional steel jackets. But firstly, the measures are hidden. Most visitors wouldn't even know the purpose of the steel jackets. And secondly, the cost was much lower than originally envisaged. And when we asked, it was 10% of the contingency they put aside. So the site is inherently now more secure than any other site in the country. I'd suggest one of the safest malls in the world. And if a device did go off, even a large SUV-sized device, it's highly likely that the building would survive and business could be recovered quickly. And the same with the Façade. This is a luxury hotel in Abu Dhabi. Behind this is a 2,000-seater ballroom, and the distance from the road to the Façade was not sufficient to prevent failure of the Façade from a vehicle-borne device. And that would result in secondary fragmentation of the glass into the main ballroom, which was deemed to be unacceptable. Now, we resolved this by leaving the Façade as it is and created a solid wall behind, which resisted the blast and captured any fragmentation, protecting people inside. Now, architecturally, there's minimal change to the outside of the building, and internally, there's little impact on cost and spatial layouts, demonstrating that architectural visions can be retained while still achieving very high levels of security and for much less expenditure than people envisage. The standard engineering approach would be to reduce the degree of fenestration or make the glazing panels smaller, and then using expensive blast-resistant glazing and framing to engineer out the solution. However, this solution used a structural solution behind a standard facade, using innovation rather than certified products. And just an example of innovation in security, we were required to prevent access through the exit bridge in case of a terrorist attack. So this was a hydraulically operated ramp that could spring up and block the route if someone was detected moving against the flow. Hardly noticeable, discreet, no one walking over it has any idea what purpose it serves. In effect, it's an old drawbridge. It might not completely deny access, but it will certainly create a significant delay, which provides valuable time for the operators to respond. You won't find it in any security catalogue, it's not certified, but it is effective and it works. And an excellent example of what an innovative architect and an engineer can do to solve a security problem. And here's a similar one, just to close off parts of the museum in the Louvre at night, where they had lots of hidden spaces and courtyards which made security very difficult, and they wanted to allow 24/7 access to the museum. So these panels were just brought across at night time, and during the day they were designed to hide within the facade of each of the buildings. So again, good innovative solution, no security products, tied in with the architecture of the building. So I'd just like to finish with one case study really to demonstrate what I mean by the spatial layout and a good example. I was contacted by an architect for a new civic centre in Reading, and unlike any before him, he asked for an intellectual debate on the benefits of horizontal and vertical zoning. The civic centre, as most of you know, have a requirement for direct interaction with the public with many of its departments. Many of these interactions are a little heated, customers are unhappy, and they give rise to conflict. So the value of the horizontal zoning was that it ensured that the public remained on the ground floor. However, it also meant that the staff had to continually come down from the upper floors, which was inefficient, but it made access control and the public divide easy. Vertical zoning allowed for direct contact with the public on each floor, made it more efficient for the staff, but it also required customers to have access to every floor. That made zoning more difficult and security more comprehensive. But for me, it represented the start of a new methodology, early interaction with architects, understanding the building, the layout, the function, and identifying what the primary security challenge was. And to discuss this right from early concept design, when there were fewer constraints, when building shape and internal layouts are more flexible, and most importantly, when we can make a building more inherently secure before we really get into the detail of the design process, not to discuss camera placements or turnstiles. Shortly after, I was involved in another similar project for a new Wexford County Council headquarters in Ireland. And at the same time, I didn't realise just how good this design was from a security perspective. But looking back, it is so simple, so functional, and for security, just simply brilliant, as it addressed all the security issues in the same way. Now, as this image demonstrates, the facade is simple, straight, and it can be covered by only 4 cameras. The double glass facade enables surveillance into the building, adhering to the principles of crime prevention through environmental design, and also enables surveillance from inside out. This creates a challenging environment for any would-be offender, as they can be seen inside and out of the building. There are no areas around the facade in which to hide, no dark corners or door recesses. And internally, the accommodation is laid out as a series of 6 discrete blocks, each housing a government service and an individual department, the same for the Reading Civic Building. Running through the centre is an open space that supports wayfinding, inquiry desk, public counters, informal seating. And this allows the building to be navigated in an efficient manner, but it also provides opportunities for civic ceremonies, presentations, social gatherings, which is a growing demand on public buildings. Now, within each of these 6 department blocks, one corner provides a reception area, which is the single separation between the public thoroughfare and the secure office space that occupy the ground and first floors of each block. The zoning and the delineation of public space is so straightforward, with all public meeting rooms located on the ground floor. 6 blocks, only 6 access control doors, and a building that can use the public space inside 24 hours a day if required, without compromising the security of each department office. Easy to secure, minimal technical equipment, easy to observe on foot or via CCTV. Now, my only wish is that I'd influence the architect in some way to come up with a design, but sadly not. It was all their work, but it reinforces one of my key points that good design is good security. If it functions well as a building, then it should function well for security. I can't talk about the merits of this building architecturally, but as a security professional, I think it's up there one of the most simple but brilliant secure environments. And probably no one who works or visits there will even notice that, as it is an inherent part of the building, which is surely what we're aiming for, welcoming and safe and secure places, but where security is effective and unobtrusive. So my headlines from today, what I'd like you to take away. Firstly, security can be done differently, better. It doesn't have to be ugly, constraining or negative. Even very high levels of security can be achieved while still achieving all other project design objectives. Early engagement is essential. In early planning and concept, when the layouts are more flexible, more can be achieved, security can be embedded and cheaper. We see ourselves as an equal design discipline and have developed the personal and professional skill sets that enable us to collaborate with architects and designers as equals, not as a minor specialist discipline. And we don't see the building layout as a constraint in which we deploy our systems. We collaborate with a design team to influence these elements to achieve our security needs. We believe in establishing a strong foundation for the security design, so each measure can be justified in terms of risk and cost, maintaining that golden thread of security to provide continuity of advice and a documented audit trail of security decision making. This enables us to achieve security objectives and outcomes through other disciplines, most notably architecture and landscape designs, to increase the inherent level of safety and security within the building. And security is not just about the cameras, gates and fences. Security needs to be intelligent and adaptable, and that can only be achieved if it's designed intelligently. Collaboration, communication and coordination are key. Security as a discipline is often remote, working on its own and outside of the mainstream disciplines. But security consultants must work hard to be fully integrated into the design team and possess excellent collaboration and communication skills. We do not see the design stage reports as the focus of our work. We see these as the culmination of our work and a natural byproduct of the regular ongoing interaction. And above all, use professionals with the appropriate skill sets who can develop an effective security solution that does not compromise your project vision and who will not allow those negative views of security to continue. Do not accept the same old standard solution from your security consultants. Expect and demand more of them as security consultants. And as I look forward to our next webinar, I'd like to introduce you to CABE, which is the global standard for security risk management in the built environment. It's delivered through BRE, and it's an assessor-led third-party certification scheme for buildings and built infrastructure. Very similar in approach and methodology to the BREEAM scheme for sustainability, I'm sure you're familiar with. CABE allows owners, operators and developers to measure, compare and evaluate the approach taken to security at their facilities, and it provides assurance ratings very similar to the BREEAM scheme. And for those targeting an excellent or outstanding BREEAM rating, it can be particularly useful as pursuing CABE can provide 2 credit points towards your BREEAM score. Now, CABE can be applied to all building types, whether new or in use, and for the industry it provides assurance of a better security design process by using qualified CABE professionals and assessors who must have a minimum level of experience, not just of security, but the application of security to the built environment. And those licensed professionals must also follow a defined methodology aligned with the REBA work stages as shown above, and deliver a manual of evidence that will remain with the development through its life cycle, providing that golden thread of continuity and auditable decision making. And more of that will follow in our next webinar session. So that brings my session to an end. Thank you for taking your time early this morning to listen. I hope you've learned something from today, and I look forward to presenting to you again on some of your other conferences. And I'll now take questions.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Stuart, for that this morning. That was a really interesting session. I do have a couple of questions which have come in. The first one that I've got here is there a recognised up-to-date threat level warning that designers can easily access? So, for example, the person who's asked the question has worked previously at MOD establishments where the alert state is clearly identified and updated daily, but you don't see this in sort of more civilian sort of buildings. I was just wondering if there was something that would be available to designers.
There is. If you go onto, you can go onto the Security Service website, or the Centre for Protection for National Infrastructure have got it as well. But they're very generic. You know, if you look at it now, it will say that the threat level is severe against terrorism. But that doesn't apply to everyone or everywhere. It would do if you were doing a government building or a military building or something like that. But it's very generic because they have to sanitize it enough that it doesn't give anything away. So most developments would use a risk assessment at the start, and they would hire a security professional like myself to define the threat for them. And you know, I'm currently working on a project where we've said that there isn't a threat from terrorism. Obviously, there is. You know, there's the government threat level of severe, but we've determined that it doesn't apply to them. So there is. They can go onto the websites, but it isn't particularly helpful. And I would suggest if they're worried about it, they hire a security consultant that then can not only look at the terrorism, but they'll also go and analyse the crime analysis statistics, which are now published for all areas of the UK.
Excellent, thank you. And the question was asked by Stuart, so I hope that has covered that. Now, another question which I think is an interesting point is, does the concept of having security designs which are seamlessly integrated or well embedded into the landscaping, for example, kind of act the opposite as a deterrent to an opportunist offender? So the building looks like it could be quite an easy target because the way it has been designed and the fact that it's not obvious that all these measures are sort of implemented. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's two things there. You know, whenever you're designing your security, it depends how you want to achieve your protection and your deterrence. So I've worked in some sites, particularly military sites, where we want to have a real overt presence, and therefore if you go to any military establishment, you'll see that there's obvious bollards, there's obvious fences, they high profile guarding, and then it's very obvious that it becomes more difficult when you're trying to do a hotel or a stadium or something like that, where people don't want to see it. The owners, the client, has a vision that people will turn up in this beautiful hotel, and they don't want to see it. So it's a balance between achieving deterrence as well as maintaining the vision for the site. The other thing to base it on as well, though, is that criminals and terrorists know what they're doing. Perhaps not the opportunist criminal, but the determined criminal, the organised crime gang, or the terrorist does know. And they will turn up and they will know whether they can get a vehicle close or not. It doesn't need to be a certified product. They will look at it and see it's embedded in the landscape, and it will achieve the same thing. So there is that balance, partly a balance of vision and deterrence, but equally the real people you're trying to keep away, they know what works and what doesn't work. And therefore you achieve the deterrence against what you really need to prevent, whilst not upsetting or perhaps scaring off or stigmatising the site of the general population.
Great, thank you. That's a great answer. So I have here, with the introduction of approved document Q, do you see a continued move towards revised and changes to domestic legislation with regards to security, or is the demand still limited in this respect?
So security is always a challenge because it's very unregulated. Now that sounds strange, but compared to my other colleagues in BB7 that are fire, there are so many actual laws and regulations and guidance for fire embedded in regulations. But for security, there is almost none. And the only requirement generally is within a planning application is a general application or a general requirement to ensure that safety and security is considered. And the only time any legislation comes in is if you get it wrong under the Crime and Disorder Act, people can be prosecuted for not having taken that seriously. But there is no actual guidelines, and there's no the government is loath to regulate more. If anything, it's going the other way around and reducing regulation. So the only place I've ever known is if you go to the Middle East, they regulate security more, but it tends to be more on the technology side about having CCTV. And as I said in the presentation, while I was at UPC, we were the first country in the world to actually regulate it in planning and provide an actual planning document for people to follow. But generally, it relies on best practice, and there's always a balance between normally the developers that try and do as little as possible versus balancing with what the client wants, which is to have a safe and security environment. And it's very much a subjective topic to work, a discipline. There's very little regulations and guidance to exactly fall back on, which makes it more difficult. It's easier in fire to turn around and say it complies or it doesn't comply. When you come across a security consultant, he will talk about whether you're managing the risk, whether you're going to tolerate the risk, whether you're doing enough. Is it within your risk appetite?
Super, thank you. Oh, one that's just come in, so give me 2 seconds while I quickly read through these. I'm just going to go for it. In the response to the security legislation question, there is a view to take the security. There is a view to take the security is the responsibility of the developer, and so this is likely why it is not fully within the statute law. Is that?
Yeah.
Did I make any sense there?
At the moment, it's looked at from a. Do you want me to answer, Katie?
Yeah, if you can.
At the moment,
probably more of a statement than a question. So.
Yeah, at the moment, because there's no guidance, like with fire, if you as a developer build a building which is non-compliant, it becomes your responsibility. But because that doesn't exist with security, the only time liability would come into it is once the site is off and running and then it gets attacked, whether it be by a criminal or a terrorist, then it would be part owner, part operator of that site would then become responsible for providing, whether security has been achieved or not. So at the moment, developers can avoid all of that because they're not responsible in any way, because there is no guidance or legislation to follow to, and they're highly unlikely to be attacked during the process of construction. So once they hand over, then it becomes important. So generally, I find myself in the position where I'm trying to forward think. We always bring the future operator and owner into the design stage to say, look, this is what you're taking over. This is how you need to manage the building. This is the level of risk that you're going to have left. And do you agree with that? Because once the site goes live and it's commissioned and it's over to you, they're immediately responsible. And there is no fallback on the developer because there is no legislation to base it on. So it's very much a role for security in the design process is forward thinking, trying to make sure that we provide them with a level of risk they're happy with, which is very different to most other design disciplines.
Excellent, great, thank you. And that has, yeah, I've got a few comments saying, great, thank you, great answer for that one. So I must have made myself clear somewhere down the line. Got a question from Graham, who has asked about this morning's presentation is based around new design, but what solutions can really be applied to established buildings apart from sort of the obvious and the other applications to appear to deter threats and make it obvious that security systems are being applied?
Yeah, I mean, existing buildings are always more of a challenge. You know, and we do get involved in those because we have renovations and regenerations. And you're less, again, what I would say is even if you are going to refurbish it, do think about the spatial things first, because even just moving around the spatial layouts for the lobbies and the entrances, which are always the biggest design challenges, you can achieve far more before jumping to the solutions. But then ultimately, you know, you will be looking at the deployment of the equipment, whether it be access control, half-height turnstiles, whether it be CCTV, intruder detection. The one thing I would say with those, though, is again, think carefully about how they all work together. You know, again, quite often people, because it's a retrofit, they don't get involved in the full design process. They'll go straight to perhaps a contractor and just install security. But I'd almost pretend that it is a new building. You know, you need someone to think about how the whole building works, how the current security does or doesn't work, and then come up with a whole new strategy. And when you've done that, which makes sure that, you know, all the pedestrian movement works, all the vehicle movement works, takes into account parking and everything. Then once you've done all of that, then start to consider where you're going to deploy your technology. And you can do it, you know, even if you're constrained, you can use, you know, the less you're achieving planning, the more you have to do in hard engineering, which tends to increase the cost. But it's not impossible. You can still do it. It might not be embedded as much. It might be more overt and obvious, but you can still have effective security. But I would suggest that the key requirement is to make sure it's balanced and make sure it's considered strategically, rather than just going straight to an installer to say, right, I need equipment.
Great, thank you. I think that was great questions and some great answers. Now, what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to wrap this up because I'm conscious of time and it's practically approaching 9 o'clock, which is sort of, we do allow hours for these sessions. So if we haven't got round to asking your question, we will come back to you sort of separately on those. So what I would like to do now is just thank you, Stuart, for your time this morning, for your presentation. I think, you know, interesting session on something that, you know, we don't necessarily cover all the time here. So really interesting comments and thoughts there. To everybody who's listening and attended today, that's 1 hour CPD that you can claim for this morning. And just want to bring your attention to our next webinar, which will be held on the 8th of May, so another early start on a Wednesday morning. And we're going to have an ecology and environmental themed webinar. We're still just putting the finer details together, but I do have the registration information. So what I will do is you'll get an email after this session this morning, and the registration link will be in that email if you wish to join us again for another webinar. So again, it just leaves it for me to say thank you all for your time. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you online again soon.